A black sheep doesn't have to be considered bad to have that loving title and distinction. I mean, some of them are considered quite bad and need layers peeled down to show the good inside. There are other cases though. A movie can be a black sheep if it was buried by a more popular outing like The Last Broadcast being utterly forgotten after the behemoth Blair Witch made its appearance. Sometimes, like The Last Broadcast, it can just be buried within its own genre, decade, year, or as in today's title, all three. I've seen more than a few comments for this one, so let's take a look at Werewolves in 1981. No, not that one. The other one. No, not that one either. The other wolf movie of 1981. Michael Waldie's Wolfen. I would imagine that most, if not all of us, watching this video grew up with one or two of the werewolf movies of 1981. Most people probably enjoy both An American Werewolf in London and The Howling, but have a preference of make and model. For me, it's An American Werewolf in London. I enjoy The Howling, especially now over 20 years after I first watched it. This is another case of my brothers, who were and still are something of gurus for me in the world of pop culture, introducing me to this. I remember finding out about it and watching The Howling in Tempe, Arizona, and wondering how I'd never seen this movie, and also not enjoying it as much as I should. It was the same as London, but different. Of course now, especially after writing our 80s horror memory episode on the two and revisiting both, I see how similar they actually are in development and behind-the-scenes stories, but also how beautifully different they both are. Beautifully different is a wonderful way to describe the other movie, however. A third wolf movie of that very year that may lack the historical attention and star power behind the camera, but packs a really nice punch nonetheless. I say wolf movie because it's not a traditional werewolf flick. While An American Werewolf in London is very traditional in terms of its monster rules, and The Howling at least adheres to the Wolfman mythos, even if it plays fast and loose with the rules. Wolfen has much more pathos and meaning that it mixes up with its pulp. While it's also based on a novel like The Howling, it sticks much closer to its source material and is as much a cop drama, environmental message, and sociological message movie as it is horror. It's admittedly a slower, drier affair than either of the other two movies in its pack, but it's well worth tracking down and gives you a completely different experience. The movie starts off with a rich couple on their way home from an upscale party, and they decide to stop in Battery Park.
Stop by Battery Park.
Routing change, penthouse ETA 0615.
What's Vanderveer gonna do at the Battery at 6 in the morning?
Yeah, I think that may be the hardest part to swallow of this movie over 40 years later. They are slain by something with a fun, early version of Predator vision, and even their large driver/bodyguard is taken out without much difficulty.
3 bodies. Mutilation, possible sexual assault.
A former captain of the NYPD is brought in to help solve the murders, as the yuppie couple was very high profile, and the mayor, along with the Vanderveer family's private security, believe it to be work of terrorists. The former, and now brought back current, Captain Dewey is played by Albert Finney. Finney plays the role wonderfully, with part sarcastic pessimism and part willing to believe skeptic as the events unfold. Finney may be one of the most underrated great actors of all time, as the 5-time Oscar-nominated thespian would play some larger-than-life roles including Ebenezer Scrooge, Hercule Poirot in the star-studded Murder on the Orient Express from '74, and would end his career in a James Bond movie. For horror, well, this is about it, and even this is almost horror-adjacent enough for an actor to not consider it in the genre. He was also in the very underseen sci-fi movie Looker that is smarter today than it even was 42 years ago. The politicians also assign a criminal expert, Rebecca Neff, played by Diane Venora. Venora is much less known than Finney as the co-lead, and in fact was much less known as this was her first feature film. She would go on to appear in things like Heat, FX, and The Insider. The rest of the cast is a fun mix of character actors and stars from other walks of life. The coroner, Whittington, is played by Gregory Hines. Our lead suspect is the legendary Edward James Olmos. Tom Noonan is the helpful zoo employee, and Dick O'Neill is Dewey's boss.
How can you eat that crap?
We even get small appearances from James Tolkien and Reginald VelJohnson. While Hines is really only in this and an episode of Amazing Stories for genre film, Noonan is a damn legend in the biz with RoboCop 2, the creepy villain of Last Action Hero, Manhunter, House on the Devil, and a few more. Behind the camera, however, tells a different story. The director is Michael Waldie, who again is not a household name, and his only other major movie is Woodstock. The guy directed Woodstock. He also wrote the screenplay with David Ear, who only has a handful of other writing projects to his name. The book it's based off of, yet another adaptation I didn't know about until rewatching the movie, was written by Ridley Strieber, who also happened to write The Hunger and the book that The Day After Tomorrow was partially based on. The only screenplay that he wrote was for the adaptation of his own book The Communion, which is another fun and zany Christopher Walken role. Back to the movie, and another person is killed by an unseen creature in an old building that is set for demolition. Dewey and Diane go to investigate, and Diane is almost lured to her death by the sound of a baby when Dewey saves her only to hear howling and see the eyes of a wolf. Another man is slain, and Whittington discovers that the weapon isn't consistent with anything they've seen before, and he also finds several hairs on all the victims. This is when we're introduced to Noonan's zoologist, who says the hair and bites are without uncertainty from a wolf.
It's a carnivore. You got yourself some kind of meat eater.
He also makes a comment comparing wolves in general to Native Americans, and Dewey has a wild hair that sends him after a Native American he arrested back in the day, who was also part of a radical political movement.
You want to talk to him? Go on up. You want to wait? Mark's over there.
Dewey speaks to him on top of a bridge where Eddie Holt alludes to Dewey that he can shapeshift like many of them can, and Dewey decides to tail him. Doing his own investigating, zoologist Ferguson looks for wolves in Central Park and is killed for his trouble. Dewey gets permission from his superior to do a stakeout at the abandoned building that Neff almost died at. While there's nothing in the actual building anymore, Whittington is killed after a surprise attack from a wolf, and Dewey's unable to save him in time. Shaken, he heads to the bar where Eddie Holt and his friends are. That's where they tell him the legend of the Wolfen. The Wolfen are spirit gods, and they cannot be stopped by normal men and women. Eddie tells Dewey that fighting is pointless as he isn't on the same level as the Wolfen. The Wolfen are hunters, and Dewey is merely the future dead. The spirits aren't on the prowl for random killings either. They will kill for and defend their hunting grounds, even if that means venturing out and killing the Vanderveers of the world who would take more of their land from them. It's here where everything really comes together for this movie. The characters feel more real and lived in than the other two movies. Dewey is flawed but realistic. The writers explore things like alcoholism within the Native American communities, yuppie rich culture, and terrorism. The wolves aren't makeup-laden man-wolves who rip apart everything like a hot knife through butter. They aren't objectively evil, and they are aware of what they're doing. Dewey decides he wants off the case, but he, his boss, and Neff are surrounded by the wolves who kill off Warren really quickly and really brutally.
John!
The gore in this movie is not on par with its Lycan contemporaries, but severed hands, severed heads, and the right blood spatter at the right time deliver on the horror aspect of the movie. Our surviving heroes get cornered in the now vacant penthouse of the recently deceased Vanderveers, and as they get surrounded, Dewey puts down his gun and takes out the miniature plans that would build on the spirits' hunting grounds. He chooses not to fight them, just like he was warned, and sure enough, they walk away. The rest of the police arrive, and Dewey decides to go with the narrative of the terrorism angle that the private security and mayor are pushing. Not only would he probably not be believed if he told them what really happened, but it would put the community and land in further danger. A voiceover explains that the cycle will continue both with human class warfare and the Wolfen being the higher predator on the food chain. The final image ends up being Eddie and his pack as they look out on the city on top of the bridge. Wolfen is a special combination of things that makes it essential viewing for horror fans. Like its source material cousin in The Hunger being the outcast or black sheep of the vampire subgenre, the Wolfen is the same for wolf-related horror. It's not that it's better or worse than the two heavy hitters of 1981, but it's just so damn different. It rarely even gets lumped into the horror realm because it's not exactly werewolves, and it's also not exactly the tried and true formula that The Howling and London follow. While it may not have the legacy that it deserves, it has the talent, originality, and entertainment that make it required viewing. Its original theatrical run was unfortunately a huge failure, with it only garnering $10 million on its $17 million budget. But that failure shouldn't dictate how it's seen today. It comes on a 4-pack DVD with some other underappreciated movies like Coma, Bad Moon, and the 90s remake of Body Snatchers, but it also has its own solo Blu-ray from the Warner Archive collection. Hopefully one of our physical fiends at Scream Factory or Arrow will do the right thing soon. Give Wolfen a chance with an open mind and a respect for the spirits. You'll be glad you did.